Stand Together is proudly sponsored by these international genetic solutions partners. When we collaborate, you profit, achieve results, and build your future with powerful data and informed decisions. Coming up, today's commercial cattle producers rely on the best science to make profitable genetic decisions. International Genetic Solutions offers a powerful answer to that call, bringing leading cattle breeds, businesses, and cutting-edge research to the table. Here we discuss sustainable genetics in an industry that rewards producers who target both efficiency and production, both value drivers of thriving cattle operations and healthy bottom lines.
Welcome to the International Genetic Solutions Stand Together. I'm your host, Chip Kemp. Sustainability. It's a word with a variety of definitions and interpretations. We're about to broach a complex topic and discuss how sustainable cattle genetics lead to sustainable profits. With me today is Dr. Samantha Worth with the United States Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. It's a mouthful.
Yes.
Dr. Worth, kind of lay the table. Explain to the audience what USRSB is.
Yeah, so first off, for short, USRSB. Much easier to say in one go, but we are a multi-stakeholder organization. We're completely member funded. We have 140 members today. And our whole goal is to work across the entire beef value chain, so from cow-calf producers all the way through to retail and food service, to help at each segment of beef production to enhance sustainability as we move forward.
Okay. Describe the six approaches or the six topics that are important to you in the roundtable in general.
Yeah, so typically with sustainability, right, it's a buzzword to a lot of people. It gets thrown around a lot and it means a lot to a lot of different people. We define sustainability actually with 6 high priority indicators. So 3 of them are environmental. We talk about land use, water use, air and greenhouse gas emissions, and then we have a couple of social goals, and those are animal well-being and employee well-being. And then we also talk about the economic side, because we don't have any of this, right, if we're not financially viable. So, and that's our efficiency and yield category.
There are some industry partners who have serious pull-through, serious leverage from all sectors of the business. Can you describe a little bit of that dynamic of how those different sectors work together and how you all parlay them across different committees and those sort of things?
USRSB is really unique in the organizations that we bring to the table. Our membership is 51% producers, because for us that's the most important part. We want to make sure producer voices are heard. But we work with companies outside the value chain, but working in conjunction with us, right? Like Noble Research Foundation and these different entities that kind of help us to think through, one, what we can do directly in the industry, but also kind of tie it into a reality check of what's happening outside of us, right? Outside of our bubble of we think and we know we're doing good, but we need to be able to demonstrate that, and how do we do that? And that's what these companies help bring to the table for us.
No doubt you've bumped into some folks who this chafes them a little bit, right? And so that's okay. We need to have the tough conversations. Do you have any thoughts that tie into how you can make those pieces palatable, maybe even to the audiences who are a little less receptive at first blush?
I had an interest in learning more about where my food comes from, right? And that's something that resonates with many consumers these days, is where does our food come from? Can we trust what's happening? And the answer is yes, right? And the best way to get that assurance to a consumer is direct contact with producers, right? Being able to go out to a rancher's operation and see how they raise their cattle, how they care for their cattle, how they care for the land and the resources, that goes honestly the furthest out of anything you can do.
I want to talk just a little bit more on what are some of the holes as you see it that we need to understand better, to do your job better, to serve the industry at large better? Are there specific voids that we need to find a way to dig into?
Often when we hear about sustainability in the media, it really has a myopic focus on greenhouse gas emissions, right? especially when we talk about beef cattle production, because they're ruminants and they create methane. And so I think one of the biggest kind of, I don't know if it's a whole, but a story we're not telling is just the advancement that we have done, over centuries of continuous improvement and genetic improvement, right? Working to make animals more efficient, need less resources to have more output. I think that's one of the key things in terms of just communicating better about and more clearly about, understanding better the carbon soil chemistry will really go a long ways in filling gaps of demonstrating, hey, actually you want cattle on this land because without them we have a problem.
As we look at genetic opportunities, from our standpoint, those of us who are in the genetic evaluation business, seed stock operators, even the cow-calf producers back home who are making genetic decisions, are there any suggestions, recommendations, or just basic encouragement you might offer some of them as they're doing the very tangible step of picking a bull that might move them farther?
I think when we talk about this sustainability space, and especially in the world of greenhouse gas emissions, there's this tendency to talk about technology, right? What's the next additive I can use, or the next, but I think a lot of people forget that genetics are the original tool, right? That's the original mode of technological advancement in cow-calf production. That's how we've gotten where we're at today, is through genetic improvement. So some of the best things that a rancher can do when they're thinking through a seed stock operation or their cow-calf production is, you want to breed for a mama cow that's gonna produce a calf every time, right? You want that conception rate to be as high as possible, because that in itself is enhancing efficiency. Other tools that you can think about are how to improve feed efficiency, right? Or feed conversion efficiency. Those are things that we can genetically select for, and that will help to make animals do more with less, which we've done a remarkable job of it. Sustainability, and there's room to grow. The caveat being to always be aware of the trade-offs, right? So I like to talk a lot about optimizing, not maximizing. The last thing I just want to mention is I appreciate your approach and attitude. So frequently, some folks start with the premise that cows are a question mark to the environment, and we have to change that. Whereas my tone of the current roundtable is, cows are a positive for the environment, period. Yes. Now let's make them even better. Yeah. And I think that is a very distinct shift in tone in certain portions of our business. And I just say thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Worth, for joining us. There's more to come, including how to select genetics that pay sustainable dividends. Stay with us.
Our International Genetic Solutions discussion continues after this. IGS Stand Together is brought to you by these IGS sponsors. Grow your cattle operation with expert solutions. Neogen's genomic solutions provide insight, mitigating risk, increasing efficiency, and maximizing your herd's potential. Reach your production goals with targeted genomic profiles from Neogen. The American Simmental Association. For genetics that pay, turn to Simmental. The numbers show Simmental and Simmental-influenced calves earn more from packers and auction buyers while offering more efficient females. Stand strong with Simmental. And the American Shorthorn Association. The Shorthorn breed is America's breed. For more than 150 years, Shorthorns have served as the definition of maternal excellence, carcass quality, and sustainability. That's performance with purpose.
Welcome back. My next guest on IGS Stand Together is Ryan Bolt. Ryan is the lead geneticist at International Genetic Solutions. Ryan, thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
Appreciate it, my friend. So our last guest, Dr. Worth, really teed up a couple things that I want to pull the thread on a little bit with you, if you don't mind. She had mentioned at one point that while we chase some of the new technologies that are out there, and that's important to help us look at some of the sustainability components, she also mentioned let's not ignore the time-tested, scientifically credible and sound approaches.
Across different traits, we have different levels of heritability, and really what heritability is is the amount of variation within the traits or the differences that you see that can be attributed to genetics. And so as you think about that, the more influence that genetics has on the trait, the faster we can make selection progress on that. And so there's, traits like height, for example, is very high heritability. But there's also traits that are low heritability, and those tend to be our traits like fertility, cow longevity. And although those traits aren't very heritable, that doesn't mean that they're not important in terms of our selection decisions. Actually, most of the traits that are the most important are the lowest heritability. So how do we go about selection on those? That's where EPDs and many of the EPDs that we have, whether those be heifer related to pregnancy of heifers, stayability. Really, we want to make those selection decisions based on EPDs because that gives us the most information about that animal and its genetic potential.
Our job is to deal with the biology and then the economics, right?
Yeah.
And to give other folks tools and metrics by which they can make decisions.
Yeah.
But that's not really our space. And so if we target then in on some of the biological and economic pieces, Dr. Worth also mentioned another word that I think you're going to like. She suggested maybe we optimize some of these things as opposed to maximize. From a geneticist standpoint, tell us why that makes sense to not just necessarily maximize a given trait, but maybe to optimize a suite of traits.
Yeah, that's a great terminology, and I actually like that a lot. And so we can think about different traits, and we have a thing called genetic antagonisms, right? So a genetic antagonism may be positively in selecting for weaning weight. That has a negative effect on the mature growth size of your females, which leads to higher feed costs. And so really in terms of thinking about selection and how we want to go about selection, if we just continue to maximize traits like weaning weight, we actually have a big cost that we're assuming in terms of our mature cow size. And so really the most effective tool that we have to get at the target of optimization, because really we want to find the most profitable animals, right? The most efficient and profitable animals. The best way that we can do that is through a full life cycle index or an all-purpose type index that covers traits from conception through harvest and weights those appropriately based on their economic importance.
Maybe somebody's been straight breeding for a long time and they're struggling with this. It's a difficult, paradigm shift for them because it may be, frankly, they just don't like it. Are there some strategies they might be able to implement to still be able to stay profitable, sustainable, keep the cow size in check, but still make those kind of heavier carcasses that are in demand?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best tools that we have in animal breeding is heterosis and crossbreeding. And so, I mean, anytime you can implement that within your system, you're going to have an advantage across a multitude of traits. There's definitely different types of crossbreeding systems. You have a rotational crossbreeding system where you would use different purebred seed stock and you would essentially flip-flop females that were of the opposite breed, and you kind of go back and forth and you maintain heterosis by having a mix of those two breeds. Another approach, and a much simpler approach, is using hybrid seed stock animals. And so by using a hybrid seed stock animal, you already have that crossbreeding system kind of built into that animal, and so that gets transferred into their progeny. And so, when it comes down to kind of selecting a crossbreeding system, there's several different factors that you want to think about, and really, probably one of the biggest ones is it something that you're able to implement just from a managerial standpoint? The rotational cross, like I talked about first, that's a pretty intensive process, and I think that's one thing that's caused many to stumble and not implement a system is just due to the complexity of having to rotate things back and forth and monitor breed percentages. And And so that's probably a big challenge. Then maybe a simpler system like using hybrid seed stock will be able to fit your management constraints, but still you get some of, although it be a lower level, still some value of that heterosis and crossbreeding within your system.
Are there any other novel traits that we need to be looking for, any other data holes that you envision over the next number of years, decades, that we really need to dig into and find ways to get pipelines to get that data flowed inside the genetic evaluation?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good things that can come from health traits. I think that, and even within the traits that we commonly record now, I think, there's some that are most definitely easier to collect than others. We tend to get a lot of records on some traits and maybe not as many records on others. And so I think, to me, it's kind of a bolstering of, we want as many of those records as well so that we can get as clear of a picture across all of the populations that are associated with IGS, what those differences in genetic merit are.
So with that, I say thank you to Ryan Bolt. As we've learned, a sustainable operation requires genetics that work in the long term. Next, we explore sustainability in dollars and cents. Stay right here.
Our International Genetic Solutions discussion continues after this. IGS Stand Together is made possible by these sponsors. Braunvi Association of America. Braunvi genetics are proven among commercial cow-calf operations. Expect high carcass yields, correct structure, and unparalleled maternal traits. When profit matters, Braunvi is the answer. North American Limousine Foundation. Do more with less with Limousine. Incorporate Limousine and LimFlex genetics into your program to capitalize on the breed's feed efficiency while earning carcass premiums. Limousine today, profit tomorrow. And the American Gelbvieh Association. Gelbvieh and Balancer genetics offer increased fertility, longevity in pounds, as well as gain, grade, and value in the feed yard. Gelbvieh and Balancer, the smart, reliable, and profitable choice.
Welcome back. Joining us now, we have Dr. Blake Foraker of Washington State University and Dr. Scott Howard, Director of Operations for Meyer Natural Foods. Both are meat scientists. Both have extensive experience with the end product portions of our business. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. So our last couple guests have brought up a couple topics that I think are going to pique the interest of a lot of the viewers, and I hope they pique your interest as well. Dr. Howard, any particular traits from a feeder or a packer sector that you could say, hey, we clearly have demonstrated some success?
I think if we look at things like growth and carcass weight, I think most sectors of the industry have done a tremendous job on emphasizing those traits. Additionally, marbling, I think we've demonstrated a clear commitment to marbling, and we've made cattle higher quality over time. I think grade data would show that, and we've started to produce a product that is extremely favorable in the eyes of the overwhelming majority of consumers.
Yeah, and I think the upcoming beef quality audit is going to certainly bear that out yet again. So, Dr. Foraker, would you help us understand, we're back at home, we're in the cow-calf position, we probably don't get enough exposure to the current trends in carcass weights, current trends in marbling and where that's standing. Can you help us put a little bit of insight into that?
It really all comes back to market signal and where we're at in the industry. And so those two primary traits have, by and large, decided the value, end value of in our cattle market, right? And so as a result, that's been the focus of seed stock producers. And so as a result of those two traits, carcass weight and marbling, driving in product value and total value in our fed cattle market, we've seen nearly linear increases in carcass weights for the past several decades, to the point where we're probably today an average 950 pounds on steer carcass weights, an average across the whole U.S. industry. And then as we talk about marbling, I think the same could be said, and that probably has been more of a recent trend, if you will. The last 15 to 20 years, we've seen remarkable increases in the average marbling score across the industry, to the tune today where if you're not 80% choice within a feed yard, you're probably less than par relative relative to the other contemporaries in the industry. So really, really remarkable advancements in those two traits.
For those of us who think more in live weight than carcass weight, give me a sense of what the live weight of that steer that's making that 950,000 pound carcass is weighing.
Yeah, that's impressive, right? We're knocking over 1,500 pounds live, right? And in the case of many instances, it's not uncommon to see 1,600 or 1,700 pound steers. As we increase weight, we're increasing weight of all tissues, and are we absolutely maximizing the efficiency and the proportions of all of those tissues by increasing carcass weight? So I think as we move into this next segment here, we're talking much less about total carcass weight and what actually is in that carcass weight that may or may not make us money.
In particular, as we look ahead in the packing sector, where they're going to be looking at tighter margins here in the next couple of years, and also fewer numbers. We've established a demand for premium beef in the United States, and as this cow herd has shrunk, we're going to have fewer animals to supply that premium demand in the industry. So again, more and more, we're going to have to produce more of these higher quality cattle that are going to hit that mark that we've heard from consumers they want. But I think as we move forward in our discussion, there are some things that we really need to be mindful of in terms of how do we do that efficiently and make sure that we aren't losing sight of some of the things that might cost a packer money or might cost our industry money relative to the inputs that we're putting at these cattle to get them to that extremely high quality endpoint.
You mentioned some of those things we're good at, the growth traits and marbling. There are probably some things we have not been as successful at. Want to stab at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, if we look at our beef cattle population and our selection criteria, we've got 4 EPDs that we lean on primarily in the carcass space: hot carcass weight, marbling, ribeye area, and fat. And we talked about 2 of those being very successful by all elements of the supply chain. If we look at the other 2, I think we've got maybe some more questions to answer. And again, when we start talking about fat, I think to me, that's where the efficiency element comes in. And what I mean by that is we know that we need to produce high quality cattle, but can we find those cattle that are going to deposit that marbling more efficiently at decreased levels of external fat so that we aren't providing a high quality yield grade 4 or 5 animal to that packer?
What are the limitations of our current understanding of muscle? And maybe what are some alternatives you see out on the horizon?
It's important to remember that we're using ribeye area in combination with weight to a degree to predict muscle to bone ratio, and that's something that's probably not talked enough about in our industry. I believe that even within the conventional cattle population, there are very large variances in muscle to bone ratio.
I think there might be another set of concerns at present as we see some of these heavy cattle really having some significant issues in certain populations with congestive heart failure issues. Again, these animals are roughly 30% fat at the end of their life. So from a human standpoint, if I go to my doctor, the doctor goes, dude, this isn't good for you. What are some things then that we can look at from animal fitness traits?
The extreme amounts of fat that they're depositing and congestive heart failure is no doubt a big topic within the industry because of its major implications on value and value lost because of death loss within the feed yard there. The value of heterosis and survivability from crossbreeding, and I think our industry has really benefited from that. I don't know that any research has been done to quite understand the implications of crossbreeding on traits like congestive heart failure or what kind of the break-even point is, if you will, from a fat deposition standpoint and its relationship to crossbreeding versus straight-bred breeding and congestive heart failure. But I think that's an interesting point there, Chip. Don't know if we entirely have an answer in our industry.
Are these topics, these fitness traits, some of the efficiency traits, are they starting to become top or front of mind for those folks, or is it still something that they defer to you all for?
You know, I think the answer is yes, but it's indirectly. And what I mean by that is, are there consumers and retailers and food service people who are buying from packers that are wanting to know more about the supply chain and how these cattle are managed? Absolutely. More importantly, are they wanting to understand more about the sustainability of those cattle through the system? 100%. And I think as we start talking about that sustainability element, that's really where some of these things that we've discussed today maybe don't seem like it, but I really feel like they do drive into that sustainability discussion of, okay, if we're having a higher mortality or death loss, well, that was countless resources that were invested into that animal that are literally all for naught. If we're talking about fat thickness, for instance, or that deposition of fat that Dr. Foraker mentioned, if we're talking about pushing animals to 0.8 just to get them to grade choice and hitting 30% 4s and 5s just to hit that mark on quality, are we really utilizing resources responsibly, or should we as breeders be looking for that more efficient solution for those animals that again are going to hit that quality endpoint at a slightly reduced level of fat? Are these things prevalent to the end consumer? Maybe not directly. I don't have a retailer coming and asking me about, necessarily death loss per se, but absolutely sustainability, and absolutely in the years ahead, we talked a lot about compressed margins. These things are going to become even more important, not just from a sustainability standpoint, but also from an economic viability of our industry.
I think it's important as we move forward here to really start thinking about the entire life cycle of the animal, right? And not just the actual animal itself, but the animals that it came from, right? Because I think we also understand that everyone wants to talk about greenhouse gas emissions in the feedlot and how intensive feeding is perhaps a bad thing from that perspective. But it's really, if we actually look at the whole beef sector, it's the majority of those greenhouse gases actually come from the mama cow, right? And so we need to understand her implications on that entire system. What kind of calf is she producing? Do we have the most manageable and the lowest maintenance kind of cow in that situation to minimize greenhouse gases from a sustainability standpoint in that sector?
You kind of sound like a closet geneticist, and I kind of like that, because essentially you just described what many of us would say. It takes a responsible whole life cycle index to provide the answer. In today's world, does that provide all the pieces we need for that sustainability conversation that you mentioned? Clearly not, but it probably gets us 75% of the way there. And since we have essentially no other meaningful metric right now that we can use, maybe in lieu, as we wait for those to come online and we augment those, and in a conversation earlier with Ryan Bolt, this was exactly what he's saying. Hey, and so that's why I say you sound like the closet geneticist. Let's use that tool that's readily available. We could have that tomorrow. Is it perfect? No. Is it a darn sight farther down the track than anything else that we have? And then we use people like yourself and others to build the other pieces. Gentlemen, I say thank you. It's been an absolute honor. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for another phenomenal conversation. Look forward to seeing you next time. If you need any further information on this topic or any other, visit us at internationalgeneticsolutions.com.
Stand Together was brought to you by these IGS partners. Visit them online or at internationalgeneticsolutions.com to learn more.